the Lord of Darkness, a rock legend. Ozzy Osbourne was more than just a vocalist. He was a fierce storm, a survivor, and the creator of a fortune as untamed, vast, and remarkable as his life. Now that he has completed that voyage, he leaves behind more than just songs. His legacy is one of suffering, defiance, and incredible fortune. His legacy is nothing short of astounding. Over the course of 5 grueling decades of traveling, Ozzy amassed an estimated fortune of over $220 million at the time of his death. Platinum records, tumultuous TV appearances, and a dark empire transformed into wealth. Globally, he sold over 100 million records. Both as Black Sabbath's iconic vocalist and as a solo performer, every note adds to a constant flow of royalties that will continue to reverberate long after he passes away. His real estate holdings were worldwide in scope and Gothic in splendor. Historic houses throughout Beverly Hills and Hancock Park, a lavish penthouse at Sierra Towers, and a castle-like country estate in Buckinghamshire with a personal rehab wing. Every property has the mark of a man who led a violent life and returned more powerful. Then there is his collection of loud, black, and elegant cars. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, a Ferrari 458, an Audi Rate, and a number of vintage British animals. All of them are exquisitely designed, cruel when pressed, and embody Ozzy's soul. His legacy is that of a guy who climbed out of the depths of the Birmingham slums to have his name inscribed on the Mount Rushmore of music. A man who, even in his latter hours, was considering impact rather than luxury. You will learn the entire scope of his wealth, legacy, and will in this movie. Remember to hit like as a silent homage to this remarkable skill before we start. Let's pause for a few moments to reflect and go back to the day that Ozzy Osbourne breathed his last breath before we examine what he left behind. The walls of his Buckinghamshire estate were motionless on July 22, 2025. There were no pyrotechnics exploding behind a man who was famed for setting the globe on fire, no stage lights, and no reverberating roars from a stadium. Silence was all that was heard. The family was gathered around his bedside in a mournful stillness. As the machine slowed, his wife of over 40 years, Sharon Osbourne, clutched his hand. She didn't cry. "You did it. You made it through." "It was not a dramatic moment," she muttered. "It wasn't noisy. It wasn't angry. It was quiet, profound, final, and human." And in that silence, the world was burdened by the loss of a man who had survived 1,000 deaths before this one. In addition to a rock icon, Ozzy Osbourne died of sudden myocardial infarction, complicated by cardiac arrest and long-term effects of Parkinson's disease, which he had concealed from the public for years, according to the official death certificate. Few realized the extent of the agony he suffered in private, even though admirers had observed the tremors, stiffness, and slowing of the wild guy they once knew. He admitted, "There are days I can't even hold a cup," during an interview in 2020. When Ozzy was kicked out of Black Sabbath in 1979 for being too crazy, even for the band that had made darkness a brand, he said, "But I'm still breathing, still fighting." He confined himself to hotel rooms, lost in his own thoughts, and drowned in a poisonous concoction of drink, addiction, and hopelessness. He had lost his rock star status. He was a ghost, a shadow of the man he once was. Nights turned into black holes and days into blurs. Few thought he would make it through the year. Even fewer believed he would come back. Then Sharon arrived. Hope, something even more startling than the fall, was with her. He didn't have a second opportunity at his comeback. Resurrection was the event. Not only that, it saved his soul. It left a legacy. Blizzard of Oz was more than just an album. When it came out in 1980, it was a lifeline. Crazy Train was more than just a hit song. They were songs of redemption. Ozzy saw light for the first time in years, and the album became multi-platinum. "Every dollar made wasn't luxury," he stated in a 1997 interview. "That record got me my first real home. It purchased me a future." Every note screamed, not indulgence, but survival. In 1982, tragedy cut through the victory when Ozzy's closest creative partner, Randy Rhoads, was killed in a bizarre airplane crash while on tour. The news devastated him. He didn't talk, he didn't eat, he just crumbled. "I died with Randy that day," he would say years later. It was evidence that he still mattered, but even the light had shadows. The 1991 album, No More Tears, became both a cry and a success, selling over 4 million copies in the US alone. "The rest of me has just been pretending, and yet, even broken," he said as he walked back into the studio. Even hollowed out, he sung. He repeatedly rebuilt from ashes. The royalties poured in. In 2003, an ATV accident almost ended everything again, with a punctured lung, 8 shattered ribs, and a broken collarbone. As Sharon braced herself for the worst, Ozzy did what he always did. He held on. They told her to say goodbye, he recalled. The empire grew, but so did the scars. I never thought I'd live long enough to be rich, he once said, half laughing, half crying. But I wasn't ready, not yet. Nevertheless, fate continued to deal him cruel hands. In 2020, he disclosed a secret he had kept to himself: Parkinson's disease. However, the illness had been there, silently gnawing at him. The world saw the man's trembling hands and shuffling steps, but they didn't see the will. He was fighting his own body. But in the twilight of his life, the madness faded, the noise diminished, and the Buckinghamshire estate that had once hosted wild parties turned into a haven of quiet, dotted with prayer, gentle laughter, and whispered goodbyes. He continued to appear, to thank fans, and to stand beneath lights he could no longer see clearly. Ozzy Osbourne's last moments weren't a breakdown. Rather, they were a breakthrough. After decades of fire, rage, and disintegration, he left this world in silence, holding the hand that held him steady through every storm. Those close to him say he laughed when he could, forgave, rested, and let go. Ozzy Osbourne left behind more than just wealth. He left behind the weight of a legacy forged through fire. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was a staggering $220 million. But behind that figure lie not only fame and fortune, but also scars, sacrifice, and decades of survival. There were no encores, just a heartbeat slowing into silence. A legacy carried on the breath of goodbye. And in that silence, the legacy began to speak. His wealth was carved out of more than 50 years of unrelenting creation, and more than 100 million records sold worldwide, spanning his time with Black Sabbath and his explosive solo career. From the ferocious chaos of Paranoid to the haunting vulnerability of Mama, I'm Coming Home, every cent in that empire was earned, often painfully in the glow of stage lights and the shadows of personal collapse. Even in silence, his music never ceased to work for him. His carefully crafted royalties continue to generate income even after his death. Each time a Black Sabbath track is played in a movie, on the radio, or on streaming services, it contributes to a steady stream of income. Each note became a brick in the empire of a man who refused to disappear. The value of posthumous music rights skyrocketed immediately after his death, as fans and the media re-examined the catalog that defined generations. Then there is the Osbourne brand, whose reality show was more than just television. It was a cultural phenomenon. His solo discography, which includes multi-platinum albums, is still a treasure trove of rights and renewals. Sharon skillfully managed the rights to his name, music, and image, transforming chaos into commerce. And it gave the world a front-row seat to Ozzy's chaotic home life from 2002 to 2005, launching a merchandising empire and licensing deals that carried into podcasts, memoirs, and re-releases. Music historians estimate that over 30% of Ozzy's estate's ongoing post-death income will come from synchronization rights, soundtracks, advertising, biopics, and documentaries about heavy metal's most iconic madman. The licensing revenue also came from the use of Ozzy's image and music in commercials, documentaries, retrospectives, and tribute shows. However, statistics alone cannot tell this story, because the intricate web of family lies behind every contract and streaming milestone. Documents examined soon after his death reveal that Ozzy left a comprehensive estate plan that struck a balance between generosity and foresight. His pillar of support, Sharon, was given lifetime estate use, which allows her to live in and have complete access to the family's properties until her own death. His 6 children, Amy, Kelly, Jack, Louis, Jessica, and Elliot, were identified as equal beneficiaries of his possessions, and each will earn a share of the royalties and business interests linked to Ozzy's profession. He did this to make sure she would never feel alone in the houses they built together. Though even the best-laid wills cannot ensure peace, rumors of quiet tensions have surfaced, especially regarding control of future projects involving Ozzy's unreleased material. Insiders say the family is committed to honoring his legacy without falling into chaos. As Sharon once said, Ozzy gave us everything. For Amy, the eldest daughter, who frequently avoided the spotlight, a special trust fund was established, protecting her privacy while honoring her place in his heart. It is our responsibility not to destroy that. In the end, the wealth he left behind was more than just property, royalties, and rights. It was the culmination of suffering transformed into song, of pain transformed into purpose, of a Birmingham boy who defied death more times than most could fathom, and who left the world richer in meaning as well as money. Ozzy Osbourne's legacy isn't just etched into records or royalty checks. It's carved into bricks and marble, sprawled across continents, whispered through hallways heavy with memory. Because when a man dies, his money stays where he dies. But when a legend dies, his story multiplies. Every room contained the weight of Ozzy's struggles and the echoes of his rebirths. The Buckinghamshire estate in England was never intended to be a home. It was a place to rebuild, heal, and remember, not just a place to live. After a terrible period of drug and alcohol addiction, this estate became his haven of sobriety. Tucked away in one of the back wings was a private rehab facility, a place constructed not for luxury but for necessity. Originally, it was a hideaway, a fortress tucked into the countryside where paparazzi couldn't find him, where the spotlight couldn't reach, and where the only noise came from the wind and the quiet tremble of recovery. In a 2010 interview, Sharon, the anchor, said, "That house saved his life." However, healing does not imply forgetting. Ozzy called the silence room, a room tucked away in the quietest corner of the estate, where he would sit for hours writing, humming, and occasionally just breathing. There were no pictures or gold records on the walls, only a wooden chair and a window. Ozzy needed distance after his near-fatal ATV crash in 2003, so he moved into a luxurious penthouse at Sierra Towers in Los Angeles, far from the chaos, the hills, and the echo of long-gone concerts. That room saw no applause, only survival. Sharon characterized this period as the quietest chapter of Ozzy's madness, but the penthouse witnessed not only decay, but also grace. Ozzy faced his greatest enemy, stillness. Here in this floating sanctuary, he was no longer driven by tours or albums, and he struggled with time, pain, and Parkinson's disease. The penthouse went from retreat to rebirth. And then there were the homes that hummed with laughter. His mansion in Beverly Hills and the stately property in Hancock Park. Ozzy started painting again, but this time for himself rather than galleries. His paintings were abstract, dark, and layered, and some were tender, some angry. These weren't castles of luxury, they were a flurry of activity, not from fans, but from family. The Beverly Hills house was particularly lively, with pictures lining the staircase. Jack and his father having quiet conversations by the fireplace, Kelly's impromptu jam sessions, and grandchildren running through the halls. Ozzy in denim. These residences were less about the man on stage, and more about the man off it. Ozzy with a cane. Ozzy in a Santa outfit. Ozzy holding baby Pearl. The smell of burnt toast and old records in the morning in Hancock Park. The kitchen always playing music, sometimes his own, sometimes Sinatra's, and Ozzy humming along. Every property represented a different stage of his life. Buckinghamshire represented recovery. Sierra Towers represented reckoning. Beverly Hills represented reunion, and Hancock Park represented reflection. No location was flawless, but they all served as evidence that he was still here, still trying, and still building. When asked in a 2015 interview why he kept so many properties, Ozzy simply replied, "They remember for me." Perhaps that's the most true aspect of his real estate empire, not in its market value, but in its memory. Ozzy never sold these homes because they held parts of him that he couldn't bear to lose, not because he needed them. Each car was more than just a machine, it was a memory frozen in metal. Ozzy owned an Audi rate Ferrari 458 and Rolls-Royce Phantom, all of which were thunderous, sleek, and unapologetically loud. Like the man himself, he never cared much for brands, only how the engine felt beneath him. His homes were museums of heartbreak and hope, holding the pain he outlived and the love that helped him do it. But there was one vehicle he never touched again, an ancient black Cadillac that had been their tour car since 1982. The year Randy Rhoads passed away, lay under a gray sheet in the back of his Buckinghamshire garage. Speed was his treatment, the thunder of a V8 his escape from stillness. "That car knows too much," he said, and every time he passed it he would slow down, sometimes put a hand on the hood, sometimes whisper something no one could hear. To everyone else it was just a car, but as he drove it once the morning before Rye's plane went down, Sharon tried several times to persuade him to sell it, or at least move it, but he refused. Because not every engine needs to roar, some just need to remember. Ozzy Osbourne had one more act of vulnerability to share. even as the lights dimmed and the world got ready to say goodbye to a legend. To Ozzy, it was the moment the music nearly stopped. It was a relic of pain rather than power. And in that silence, the car remained untouched, waiting, like grief that never quite left. Ozzy left behind something far more potent than numbers or assets in the last pages of his testament: letters. Handwritten, imperfect, tear-stained letters, addressed to the people who had stood by him through chaos and calm. Sealed in envelopes, tucked within his final will, sealed in envelopes. No spotlight. No applause, just ink, paper, and a quiet kind of redemption. The letter was not grandiose, it was genuine. "You were the lighthouse when I was drowning in fog," he wrote. "I gave you storms." It was an apology and a thank you to Sharon, his lifelong companion and war buddy. These were private reckonings, his soul exposed, one word at a time. "I was housed by you." On paper, in the peaceful seclusion of farewell, he found the voice to say thank you, and I'm sorry in ways he never could aloud. Each of his children also received a letter, customary, honest, and very personal, from a man who shouted on stage but was never very good with words in real life. He wrote to Amy a heartfelt acknowledgement of her independence, her decision to walk her own path away from the spotlight. "You were brave in ways I wasn't." To Jack, a bittersweet memory of their quiet fireside chats and hikes together during Ozzy's recovery. To Kelly, a reflection on her strength and the weight of fame she never asked for. He made no attempt to change history. All he wanted to do was reconcile with it. Ozzy's influence went beyond the individual to include causes that had been close to his heart for many years. He made significant bequests to 3 designated places in his will. First, a nonprofit that funds mental health services, particularly for young men who are depressed and recovering addicts. He was all too familiar with what it was like to scream into stillness and have no one listen. This undisclosed but intentional fund will support awareness campaigns, crisis centers, and therapeutic sessions. The second was a scholarship program for young musicians, particularly those who were unable to pay for studio time, instruments, or music instruction. Ozzy has frequently mentioned robbing his first microphone. He did not want gifted people to perish in poverty. Voices longing to be heard would now be able to enter through his name. He had no desire for a statue. Later, Sharon stated that he desired scholarships. Third, a sincere gift to animal welfare groups, especially shelters that save cats and dogs from cruelty and neglect. Animals never judged him, even when the world did, according to Ozzy, a lifelong dog lover. He now donates a portion of his estate to the rehabilitating silent animals, something he was all too familiar with. These last actions bring Ozzy's story full circle, not to darkness, but to salvation. He didn't want a building to bear his name. He wanted children who have the opportunity to record their first song to whisper it in their thank you notes. He wants it to live on in the wags of dogs who have finally found a home. He desired it to be inscribed, not in marble, but rather in the restored honor of those who, like him, are engaged in quiet conflict. Few people were moved by the family's private reading of the letters following the funeral. However, they took further action. They recovered. When words had failed, they provided closure. "He seemed to be holding my hand from beyond, telling me it was okay to let go," Sharon eventually acknowledged. And that's possibly the most lasting legacy of all. Not the wealth, not the records, not the press, but the modesty of a man who acknowledged his mistakes and made a quiet effort to make things right. Ozzy Osbourne managed to create noise even after she passed away, not with pyrotechnics or yelling guitars, but with quiet, through handwritten phrases that will live on in memory even if they are never framed. Some farewells embrace because they don't reverberate. The family, Ozzy's greatest legacy, was all that was left after the last chords died away and the headlines stopped moving. Not only the music, the chaos, and the empire, but also the people who shared his experiences. The people who bore the burden of loving a man, who frequently lacked the ability to love himself aloud, and who shared the turmoil behind closed doors. Osbourne was more than just his spouse. She served as his soul's anchor, his storm wall, and his protection. She stood with him through addiction, celebrity, treachery, and sickness, not by the legend, but by the man who was injured. In his farewell letter, he thanked her for the years she fought for him, while he was unable to fight for himself, calling her the bravest person he had ever met. She is not a widow who wears mourning. One breath at a time, she continues his story, wearing it like armor. The oldest daughter, Amy, took a different route, keeping to herself and away from the cameras. However, silence was never Ozzy's strength in her eyes. It was rebellion. She followed her own path and created music on her own terms. Ozzy recently remarked in a rare interview, "She's got more of me than any of them, just not the part you see on stage." Kelly, who was ferocious and fierce, inherited his battle. She took on the weight of celebrity as a young girl and used it to her advantage. She became her father's torch and mirror in lobbying, interviews, and her own struggles with addiction and self-worth. She was dubbed "My Lion Heart" by Ozzy, and it was her who, with quivering hands and an unyielding will, passionately and quietly held the family together in the days following his death. The stabilizer, Jack, the quiet one. He was constantly present, yet he was never noisy. Jack moved in, taught him the meds, and sat with him through his tremors and sobs following Ozzy's fall in 2003. He didn't require attention. His power was his presence. Ozzy once remarked, "He's my shadow, but he's the light in it." Less well known to the outside world, but never to Ozzy, are Jessica, Louis, and Elliot. He left handwritten messages for each of them in his will, despite the fact that they came from various eras and chapters. He wrote, "You always stayed in the sky above the storm, but you weren't always close to it." They weren't background. They were in equilibrium. In the more subdued nooks of his life, they were love. Every bond and every child had a unique meaning. He also left them more than just inheritance when he passed away. He imbued them with memory, time-stamped moments, a hand on the shoulder, a chuckle in the corridor, and a song sung too off-tune to ever forget. He left them journals with half-written poems and illegible scrolls, guitars that would never be played, and jackets that still had the odor of smoke and cologne. He left not only cash, but also fragments of himself encased in memories for each of them. And maybe that's the most important legacy, the broken beauty of the truth that the man behind the craziness loved, and was loved imperfectly, deeply, and completely. Not the platinum awards, the vehicles, or the castles. It was not the crowd that stayed in the end. It was the family that stuck together and kept in mind. As Ozzy Osbourne took his final breath, the world did not fall silent. It shook, then shouted back, as though it couldn't silently let him go. Over 180 million people streamed Ozzy's songs globally. In the 48 hours after his death was announced, generation after generation heard "Crazy Train," climbed back into the charts, "Mama, I'm Coming Home," and playlists put together by both devoted followers and new listeners gave new life to even his saddest songs. The globe seemed to be yelling his name for a brief moment. However, the numbers did not reflect the true legacy. His lyrics, which examined his phrasing, resistance, and pain, were reproduced in music textbooks and studied in classrooms from Los Angeles to Liverpool. His music was not the only thing taught by professors. They imparted knowledge about his defiance, survival, and determination to accept silence. A mural of Ozzy, painted in a riot of reds and golds, sprang from brick in East London. Arms extended, eyes half closed. In New York, the city's Arts Council approved the graffitiing of his lyrics on an entire subway car, not as vandalism, but as a tribute. Osborne House, a school for troubled teenagers in Rio, taught children how to use music as a lifeline. Ozzy was more than just a noisemaker. He provided meaning to noise. Once tumultuous and untamed, his conversations were now re-examined on podcasts, as infrequent windows into a soul that had been yelling for decades. He stated in a now viral video, "I was never trying to be perfect. I was trying not to disappear." This quote is now featured on tattoos, t-shirts, and album covers. Ozzy's rawness was his revolution in a world of filtered fame and polished music. The tremors were audible in his voice. He allowed them to shudder. He showed no signs of dread. He accessorized it with eyeliner and leather. And as a result of that, he flooded every verse with honesty, anarchy, blood, and shattered glass. He became into more than just a singer. He turned into a representation. Although he didn't reach the top of every chart, he altered the survival pattern. He didn't want his flawlessness to be remembered. He desired to be known for his perseverance. Pain was wonderful because of Ozzy. Survival was noisy thanks to Ozzy. And his sound persists long after the final performance, note and breath. It was only going to be another tribute performance. But it took on a whole other form on that tragic night in Birmingham, when 40,000 hearts were beating in sync. The stadium's lights went down, and the audience became silent, not in quiet, but with respect. Everybody in the audience saw the seriousness of the situation when Ozzy Osbourne, weakened but fierce, took the stage. The words hung in the air like fog, heavy and cold, but he sang, he roared, he gave them everything he had left until the very end. And that night he didn't perform. He gave up. It wasn't just a show. "This may be the last time I ever stand on a stage," he said, his voice trembling not out of fear, but out of finality. The music didn't echo, it trembled. Every guitar riff was the weight of decades. Every lyric sounded like a last breath caught between love and loss. The wind in Birmingham that night didn't just brush against cheeks. It was a farewell letter wrapped in sound, lit by memory, and delivered with the kind of pain only survivors understand. The performance, titled "Back to the Beginning," was about returning to the place where it all began, to the soil of Birmingham, where a factory worker named John Michael Osbourne first dreamed of becoming someone more. It wasn't about spectacle. That night, he did more than just sing songs. He relived scars. As he sang "No More Tears," tears streamed down Sharon's face backstage. She was more than just a wife bidding her husband farewell. She was witnessing the love of her life finally find peace with a world that had tried to break him for so long. And in that final return, he brought with him not only decades of music, but also decades of wounds, redemption, and love. What made the night even more memorable was not just the set list or the tears that followed each note, but what happened after. Never one to seek praise, donated every single dollar earned from the show. Kelly whispered along with every lyric, and even Amy, who is always private, allowed the cameras to catch a single tear. It was not a concert, but rather a shared funeral of a man who was still standing. And then came the final bow. Not waiting for applause, he strode off stage and directly into legacy, giving an incredible $190 million to causes that had saved his life and could save others, such as Parkinson's disease research and a children's hospital in Birmingham. Even in farewell, he gave more than he ever asked for. Because legends don't leave quietly, they leave echoes that never stop haunting the places they once stood. There were no fireworks or pyrotechnics, just a single spotlight, a bowed head, and the sound of 40 people whispering goodbye through their tears. Some fans held up candles, while others held hands, and the entire city stood motionless, as if time itself paused to let him go. The story of that last stage of the man who once screamed against the world, now whispering back into it one last time, would be passed down to children born that year. As the lights went out and his silhouette vanished into the darkness, a single phrase appeared on the screen behind him. "Thank you for saving me." It wasn't signed. That night in Birmingham became more than just music, it became myth. Ozzy didn't vanish. He dissolved into every echo that ever needed him. Now that the music has subsided and the curtain has closed, what's left isn't just memory, it's movement, a ripple in time, a voice that taught us how to laugh in the dark, how to scream through sorrow, and how to survive even the unbearable. His voice, once raw and broken, became a balm for millions who didn't know how to cry until he taught them how to scream. Some legends fade. As he burned, and the flame still won't go out, he became a part of our grief, part of our rebellion, and part of our recovery. If you've ever been saved by a song, if his voice ever made your pain feel seen, then you carry a piece of him. He's in the hallway where someone blasts Iron Man for courage. He's in the headphones of a teenager trying to survive another day. He's in the tearful smiles of fans who grew old with him. He's in the hopeful eyes of kids discovering him for the first time. What part of Ozzy do you take with you? Leave a recollection here. Let the echo continue. He wanted remembering, not inscribed in stone, but in scars that healed via his music.